Welcome to Schooling Around. As we conclude another school year, we have a lot to think about. Some good, some not so good. On the good side, the bond and sinking fund was passed, and before we know it, we'll be seeing buses being purchased, buildings updated, and smooth, even roads and parking lots. Also on the good side is the status of our early childhood. 5 stars now, the rating by the state of Michigan. That's the best there is. On the bad side is the school safety issue. Not for Oxford, but all schools in general. We've seen too many school shootings, with one of them being in Parkland, Florida, that shooting at the Stoneman Douglas High School last Valentine's Day. 17 people dead, 14 kids, 2 teachers. Today we deal with this from an Oxford perspective. We'll talk to the Oakland County Sheriff Safety Liaison, Jason Louwaert. Then try to get at the roots of the problem, trying to snip the problem at the bud. An interview with Washea Jackson and Pat Mueller at Oxford Early Childhood. This and more in a moment.
Hey Leonard, you're watching OCTV.
I used to think news is news. It's all the same. But it's not. There's a big difference between local broadcast news and cable news. See, local stations are part of my community, connecting me to local news, weather, and sports on every device. It makes sense. Get the news from the people I trust who actually live here. No agenda, no bias like on cable shout shows or social media, just facts. For news I can trust, I stay local. Support your local stations. Text TV to 52886 today.
Jason Louwaert is with the Oakland County Sheriff Department. He has been assigned as the liaison officer for Oxford schools. A lot has been going on the past few months, getting a workable, meaningful plan together to make our schools safer. In addition to new locking devices on classroom doors, we have cameras in the entrances to monitor visitors during school hours. There's more going on and more to be done. I sat down with Jason for an overview. I just wanted to get an update from you as far as what's going on in our district in regard to safety training. You know, we have all this shooter stuff going on across the country, unfortunately. And I know that we've put new locks on our doors. We've put the cameras up at the entrances in a lot of cases. But there's some training going on, isn't there, as far as the staff is concerned? Can you enlighten us a bit about that?
Yes, the Sheriff's Office began last year making some plans to train the school liaison officers and some other trainers in our agency in the ALICE program. After some more attention got focused on the active shooter preparedness and that type of thing, the school has also decided to become certified in the ALICE program. And ALICE is a company, but ALICE is an acronym for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And that acronym is a list of options that are available to people that might find themselves in a violent, spontaneous attack, but it's not meant to be followed in that order. So it's basically a program where it's a little different than some of the training that we've had before, where we were only trained in lockdown. It doesn't mean you were prohibited from doing anything else, but we didn't really explore that very much.
That addresses some different situations, right?
Right. Every situation is different, and depending on where you're at and what's going on during that emergency, locking down may be a very appropriate response to that, but evacuating may also be a better one. It's important to inform people that are also in the building what's going on, so even if you're not affected by it, you're informing the people that are affected by it. It includes a last resort. The C in ALICE stands for counter. So as a last resort, if this person is able to make it through a barricade that you set up or into a room that you've locked yourself into, it gives them the option to do some very basic things. We're not teaching martial arts, or we're not teaching hand-to-hand combat to our students or our teachers or anything like that, but it does give people the option to use what's available to them to do whatever it takes to save your life if you're in that type of an emergency.
Now, I guess some of the teachers and staff have already been through the online portion of some of that training. Is that true?
Yes. Certification in the ALICE program includes an online class that I believe all the school employees have been through already. The second half of that certification is that we participate and put on a drill or a scenario-based training that they also will have to participate in. So the school district, I've gone through training with the sheriff's office to become an instructor so that I can facilitate the scenario-based training, and a number of the school district administrators and employees have also, some have already been and some will be going through shortly as well to become instructors so that we can facilitate training several hundred employees in these techniques.
And I guess is the goal to facilitate that by the end of the summer, or what are they thinking?
The last I heard, like I said, there's several hundred employees. It's a big project. I believe we're going to try to have that done by the end of the first semester next year. That may be a little bit of a lofty goal because we do have so much stuff going on, but I think it's attainable, and I think we can get it done.
And I guess they've had periodic drills in the schools?
Well, state law already requires that we participate in a certain number of fire drills per year, a certain number of lockdown drills. We have an evacuation drill where we practice getting all the students out of the building and put them in a place where they can be accounted for. Those drills are already taking place.
And I guess once the teachers go through all this, there's got to be some trickle down in this training, if you will, to the kids as well. I mean, I know you can't put all the students through the class, and the classes are changing from year to year anyway. It's an impossible thing to do, but hopefully some of the trickle down will enlighten the kids as to the proper thing to do under certain circumstances if something should occur.
Well, I would hope that the kids benefit from this as much, if not more, than the staff do. Like you said, if the teacher feels empowered with several different options to react to a situation where they're put in charge of keeping their classroom safe until first responders arrive, a lot of that ownership of that situation, a lot of that taking on responsibility for your own safety, that's going to be sensed and that's going to be learned, and passed on to the students as well. So I'm not sure if there's going to be any formal training of the students. I would hope there would be. That's something that's still being worked out. Again, trying to fit all this new stuff into an incredibly busy schedule already is a challenge, but I think it's valuable for the students to learn this. And again, we're not teaching martial arts, we're not teaching hand-to-hand combat to any high school students or any of our other students, but I think it's just a matter of teaching kids in general that they can take responsibility for their own safety, and they don't have to be paranoid about being attacked. They don't have to be looking over their shoulder all the time wondering if this is going to happen to them, but they can accept that, hey, something bad could happen today, and if it does, I have an idea what my options are to respond to that, keep myself safe, keep the people around me safe, and hopefully mitigate any type of, I don't know that it can ever be 100% prevented. I think that's a very difficult problem. If it weren't a difficult problem, I would hope it would have been solved by now.
That'll happen when we all become robots, I guess.
Absolutely.
Another issue is dealing with after-hours safety. More with Jason in a moment. So, all the features we mentioned are active during the school day. What about after hours? More with Jason Louwaert. Another thing you got to deal with is there's varying degrees of security in the schools. I don't know how else you can do it, but during the class day, obviously the doors are locked and people can't just willy-nilly be walking in and out. But then once the school day itself is done, the doors are opened up because there's after-school activities, people have to come and go, parents come in to see teachers, et cetera, et cetera. It's impossible to make things 100% safe all the time, isn't it?
Well, I guess if you look at the most secure facilities we have in our society are prisons.
Yes.
And there's locks, there's metal detectors, there's all kinds of security measures that take place in a prison, as far as allowing employees in, and allowing visitors in, contractors, people who do work at the prison, and violent events still occur at the prison. So I don't know that we want to create a situation in our school district where going into the school building feels like going into a prison. I don't believe I'm not an educator, but I'm going to guess that's not a good environment to learn in. So I don't know that we want to go to that measure as far as securing our schools, but we do have to follow some best practices.
Okay.
We do have to follow the idea that you limit the amount of entry points and access to people that have only to people that have business there during the day. The afternoons, the extracurricular activities, they provide a challenge for us.
Yeah, and they always will. Sure.
And I believe they always will, unless you're going to have, again, the same type of security at a football game as you would at one of the other stadiums where they have metal detectors, where they have security guards, things like that. I don't know if that's a possibility or a practicality at all, but it does provide a challenge for us.
And we were talking before the interview about the fact that this training really, unfortunately, the way society seems to be going, is not just for while you're in schools, but unfortunately for while you're almost anywhere, isn't it?
Well, Alice is not specific to school buildings. The Alice program has been used by hospitals, by churches, by corporations that have buildings with large amounts of people that work in the same place. They're very basic principles that apply anywhere that a sudden violent attack could occur. And you mentioned earlier some of these skills being passed down and some of this knowledge being passed down to the students. And I think it's valuable that they have that, because even after high school, the students will go out into the world, they'll go out into the workplace, they'll go out into society, and unfortunately, like you said, these events are happening at places other than schools. Schools get the most attention,
sure, but
they also happen at factories, at churches, at nightclubs, at political gatherings. They've happened at a wide variety of places, and these are not skills that are specific to a school building. So it's almost a life skill that unfortunately has to be learned during this time that we have, and hopefully the students never need it. But if they do ever find themselves in that situation, whether it's at a school building or somewhere else, they'll be able to
sure,
use those tools in their toolbox to keep them and the people around them safe.
Okay, now this is just Jason and John talking now for this
Okay.
thing. I'm gonna throw the political ball at you, and you can accept or decline. You can catch it or throw it away. But I'd like to just get your thoughts. Teachers with guns.
You said I could decline, right?
You can. Absolutely, free country.
Actually, I think a lot of people have asked me about that, and I think in the right circumstances, it could work. But it's not as simple as handing somebody a firearm and saying, okay, you're armed now, and protect the kids as you see fit. I wish it were that simple, but it's just not. There are a lot of issues that aren't discussed. You know, when people throw that out there as a simple fix, again, if there were a simple fix to this, I think it would have been done by now.
Well, it'd be one thing if they were trained as well as you are.
Well, there's training issues, there's liability issues, there are, you know, if the teachers are part of a collective bargaining agreement, there are labor issues. There's just a whole lot of issues that people probably aren't considering when they suggest arming teachers as a simple fix. Again, do I think it could work with the right people in the right circumstances? I think it's possible. Do I think those circumstances exist in Oxford? I'm not sure about that yet. I would really have to look into that before I would say yes or no. I know other countries, other areas have done it, but other countries are not the United States. Some of the countries in the Middle East do it, but that you're talking about a country, different cultural issues, different geographical issues where they live in places where you know, they could be going to war very shortly with somebody who's in very close proximity to them. So that creates a different culture and a different mindset. And you know, some of those countries are countries where military service is mandatory. Well, that creates a different culture, and it creates a different level of familiarity with firearms than it would in our country. Again, not a better or worse situation, just different than ours. And I think it could work in the right situation. I don't know but I do know it's not as simple as arm the teachers and everything will be okay.
Yeah. Okay, one last pitch and I'll let you go. Availability of assault rifles.
I guess my take on that is it depends on what your definition of an assault rifle is. If that is a rifle, if that's the textbook definition of an assault rifle, then they are already not very available. If you're talking about availability of semi-automatic firearms, if you're talking about availability of high-capacity magazines, I don't know that that's going to be a huge, I think it's a factor. I don't think it's the factor. And I think that applies to just about all of the factors surrounding this issue. Is mental health a factor? Yes. Is it the factor? I don't think it stands alone. Availability of firearms to people that shouldn't have them, whether that's a young person, whether that's somebody with some mental health issues, whether that's somebody that has committed a crime that's prohibited from possessing that. That's certainly a factor. Is it the standalone factor in this issue? I don't believe so. So I think it's one of those things, this whole issue has to be attacked from a whole lot of different directions. And again, that's what makes it a difficult situation. It's what it makes it's probably why that it's taken so long to resolve it, because there are so many different ways to come at it from, and no single way is going to solve it by itself.
So, in a moment, we take a look at what may be the root of the problem. Stay tuned.
Hey Lakeville, you're watching OCTV.
Catch all your favorite sports here on OCTV.
School safety is a complicated issue. It's really about more than school safety, but rather safety in general. The mindset that can trigger this kind of behavior probably begins early on. Washea Jackson heads up Oxford Early Childhood. Pat Mueller is her second in command. I sat down with them just after the Parkland shooting. You know, just when we think we've kind of got a grip on stuff in our schools, something new happens.
Isn't that the truth?
And we all know that now as I'm sitting down with you, what happened in Florida, terrible, terrible stuff. And I knew you're in early childhood, and that was a high school situation, but it was still a school situation.
Right.
What goes through the minds of you folks who deal with the little kids when you see something like that?
My initial thought is, what happened to you as a young child that made this happen? What clicked in your mind to think? I'm talking about from the point of view of the shooter. What clicked? What happened to you? What kind of trauma have you endured in your lifetime that made you think that this would be a good option? And I'm sure it must have been pretty traumatic. I mean, think of all that trauma. You think of all the things that he's been through. Now, please know I'm not being overly kind to the shooter, but my initial reaction is, good gracious, I have never in my life ever wanted to shoot another human being. That has never been something I wanted to do. I would imagine that most of us feel the same way. So what clicks in that person's mind to make that happen?
And I gotta think what also goes through the minds of folks like you who deal with the little kids is, what can I do to help these little kids get their minds going in the right direction so that they don't fall into a trap like that?
Exactly. And keep them safe at the same time. You know, we don't want to over alert them and scare them even further, but we also want them to be vigilant.
Right. I think about trauma and how it impacts a person, and we all handle trauma differently. Some people may become an introvert, and some others may really become an extrovert. So we all handle trauma in different ways, and recognizing the signals or the signs that let us know that someone is in a state of stress, toxic stress that might elicit different types of behaviors. And what do we do to support them in that process? Because children experience trauma all the time. And we think of traumatic situations as death of a loved one, potentially living in poverty or a high crime area, divorce or separated parents, physical, mental, or emotional abuse is another form of trauma. Having a loved one, a mother who is physically or mentally or emotionally abused, and potentially having someone that is verbally degrading is other forms of trauma. And all of that trauma combined, sometimes you see the results later, the action of that trauma come out in different ways with people. So how do we support children? How do we help them become resilient and build that resilience that traumatic things happen, but what do I do in the face of calamity? How do I bounce back? How do I have tenacity to know that this incident doesn't define me? We provided a trauma training for our staff, how trauma at home can potentially cause trauma at school, and to try to look for those signals for our staff. And how do you become more empathetic and caring and compassionate, not only for the students, but sometimes also for your colleagues that may experience some trauma. The training was absolutely wonderful and eye-opening. It promoted lots of dialogue as to what is trauma. And sometimes we don't realize that things are traumatic to us.
It's true. And sometimes it's just a matter of not feeling like you fit in, or it doesn't always have to be a really serious, traumatic shooting. Sometimes trauma can be, like you say, divorce. People who fight. That's scary. When you're a young child, having people fight in front of you is terrifying. Having siblings that pick on you a lot can be very traumatizing. And before you know it, kids all of a sudden, by the time they get to be high schoolers, have never really dealt with this stress. And so what happens is it just blows. And it blows terribly.
I had a conversation just yesterday with one of my closest friends who's a principal in another district, and she was saying one of her students came in and he was crying, and he said, I'm just going through. And we kind of chuckled, but he was so sincere. He's like, my grandmother passed away. This is a 7-year-old who has bottled all of these traumatic experiences up in his life, and he's acting out in class. He can't sit still. He's aggressive with other children. He's hypersensitive to any type of structure sometimes. And what happens when a child is always in a state of trauma or toxic stress, it is like the cortisol kicks in your body and you're constantly in this fight or flight mode, which we know does not allow the brain to self-regulate or to have those higher order thinking skills, because I am in a state of emotion. So helping children to deal with those emotions and understand that those emotions are real, and we all have a gamut of emotions, but it is the reaction kind of to those emotions that we are helping children to deal with and to build that resilience.
We live in a complicated society, don't we? And I know it's been a long time coming. I'm thinking back to my own days in school. Okay, granted, I'm the old guy in the room.
I don't know about that.
I think in my class, or may have been in a class of, say, 60 kids, maybe 2 of them had divorced parents. Mm-hmm. Today, what kind of percentage are we talking about?
I think that typically they say about 50%.
At least.
At least. The other thing that happens is we just went through the Great Recession where people lost their homes and they ended up moving in with other family members. Mm-hmm. So now you have a lot of people living in a small space. There's things like that we just don't think about. The way that you interact with your children can be very different when you're home alone with them than when you're with your grandma and your auntie and your uncle, and it just is, because you don't have your own space, you don't have your own time. It changes the pace, and sometimes we don't think about just having to move in with a family member, how difficult that can be for a young child.
A final thought from our superintendent in a moment. I sat down with our superintendent, Tim Throne, shortly after the Parkland shooting. People were giving a lot of solutions then. Perhaps this one from Tim should be at the top of the list.
The best way to keep our students and staff safe is to create an environment and have a culture where kids who are having problems get the help that they need. We identify that. We do everything we possibly can, even if the school can't provide the services. We make referrals and those types of things. But if our students and our staff can be attentive and pay attention to what other students are saying, what they're posting, what their actions are. If we're attentive and conscious of those things going on around us, I have hope that we can identify these these people with issues before there's a chance for action to take place.
A lot to ponder as we go through the summer. Fortunately, we haven't had to experience it in Oxford firsthand. Let's hope we never do. Thanks to Kyle Snage at the controls, Dan Weiss at the editing desk, and you for watching. This is Oxford Community Television, keeping it local.